your busy days. Oop, just taking time out of your busy day to come and see this last meeting and be part of the audience and the panel as well. Um, you know, we were hoping to have a little more pomp and circumstance and perhaps reverie in the last meeting of our group and do it in person and that type of thing. Um, but as everyone knows, the weather held the day, and we're here virtually as we've been for much of the year. So a little bit of a missed opportunity, but on it also puts into stark relief the importance of the work that we're doing here today. I feel fortunate to be able to have the place that I live and the shelter to stay warm, and have just good stable housing, and that's really what we're trying to do for more and more Oregonians here with the work of the HPAC. So you know, it is a good to count your blessings sometimes, and good to be reminded of the importance of hopefully some of the recommendations that end up turning into state policy at some point along the path. So I want to kick it over to JD and for any additional welcome before we start with the substantive business.
Yeah, it's good to see everybody. I was still planning on making it over the hill, and even after they closed the freeway, I'm like, I can still make it. And then Matt said no, the governor said no, so we're calling in remotely. So I was ready to come down though. I was all ready. I don't mind driving the snow a little bit, but it's really good to see everybody. It is, it's been a incredibly fast 9 months or so. I mean, it seems like just like yesterday we had our first round of meetings in March. It's hard to think that we've already had almost a full 3 or 4 seasons going through this. I think we have a really excellent set of recommendations. I really kind of want to commend the governor on the work. This is what democracy is assemble experts to make recommendations to decision makers to move us forward into help address the challenges that face us in the day. So thank you all for being a part of it. And I also thank the staff and Matt's team for all their work that we've been able to pull together. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I just want to express the sheer amount of work that everyone did, this amount of subject matter experts they've interviewed and talked to, and just the thoughtfulness that everyone kind of went through in order to be able to try and solve some of our most pressing needs of the day. So thank you all. And I guess we'll turn it back over to Matt to kind of walk us through our agenda for the day.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tuvey. Deb, did you go off mute? Did you want to share something? Oh, okay, great. So I will pull the agenda back up. So today is the final meeting of the Production Advisory Council. So I just like to, in addition to Co-Chair Hall and Co-Chair Tuvey, just want to extend my thanks and gratitude to all of the council members for all the time that you've put into the process. I know it's been a fast and short and busy past 9 months to get to where we are today. So I just want to share my appreciation, for all of the observers and subject matter experts that also participated in the process. We've got some folks that are watching the webinar today. And also express thanks to the agency staff who provided support for the council through this process in developing the recommendation. So I'll just add my thanks along with that. So for today's agenda, I will go ahead and walk folks through the draft report. The goal of this agenda item is really to both share out the sections. I'm not going to go through the content in great deal, but share out the sections with the members of the public. Have a dialogue here with the council on what folks think about the components that are in the current report. If there's anything missing, if there's anything that the council members want to have added or changed before it is finalized. So I'll walk folks through that. And then we're gonna just to close things out, we're going to have the work group chairs give a little bit of an overview of the general summary of the work that they covered in the work groups, the recommendations that they had come up with. The governor is going to stop by for that portion of the meeting and just hear about the process, hear about the topics, hear about the recommendations, and I'm sure she'll have some thoughts she also wants to share with you all as well. And then we'll close things out with next steps. So before I dive into the going through the HVAC recommendations report, any questions or comments from the co-chairs or the council members? All right.
No real questions or substantive comments, Matthew, but just thank you for all the work both setting up our process and in implementing and executing it. I don't know how many Zoom calls we've been on in the last 9 months, but I'm pretty sure that all of them you've been wearing a crisp white shirt, and you switched it up for the last meeting, went with the Johnny Cash look. So I appreciate that as well, man.
Yeah, it's the weather, right? All right.
Oh my God. You're super funny.
Okay, so so I sent this, so just a process update for the council members, but also for the public. This is posted to the Housing Production Advisory Council website. It is a draft version of just the content of the final report from the council. There was also an earlier, for council members, you may also recall about a week ago, I sent an earlier version. I'll walk through some of the changes. Really, it's just some additional content in the appendices based on feedback from some of the council members that was added. And so I'll flag that for the full council. And we can just walk through the components, kind of talk through where they came from, and feel free to interrupt. I'm sharing my screen, so feel free to interrupt and with any questions or comments to flag edits as well. So not going to go through the content. So the first piece, there's going to be a letter from the co-chairs. I'm currently working with them on drafting the letter. They didn't want to finalize it until after this meeting. And this will be to the governor and to the public, just to generally speak about the council, the process, the kind of nature of the recommendations and whatnot. It's not highlighting any specific recommendations. It's not emphasizing any particular work product. So the co-chairs are going to put this together. The goal is to have a draft finalized with them this week so we can add it in before we put this into a design format. Any questions or comments from the council members on what they'd want to make sure the co-chairs include in their letter at the front end of the report? Great, keep moving right along. Then just highlighting the executive order. Again, I think everyone here knows, but for members of the public, the Production Advisory Council was formed under Executive Order 2304, which the governor signed on her first full day in office. It established the objective of the council, which is this report, a series of recommendations around how to increase housing production by the end of the year. And even though we are having this final meeting in January, the council did ratify the recommendations on the 27th of December, so meeting the objective in the executive order. There's a few sections just giving context to the public for the council overall. So we have the council members and staff, overview of the housing production deficit and future need. It's just a narrative overview. This is not identical, but very similar to what was in the plan framework that the council adopted back in March. We then go into a little bit more depth from the executive order on what the objectives and timelines of the council are under the executive order, and then the mandate from the governor during the March meeting series when she came to the inaugural meeting of the council. We're again highlighting some of the key pieces from the plan framework that you all developed and adopted back in March of last year. So the shared agreements and principles. Again, thank you to Director Bell and the OHCS team for sharing some of the the product here that they use for their own councils and committees and commissions. We have some shared agreements that guided the work. And I do think, as somebody who participated in many of the work groups, as well as the full council, I can just say I appreciate that I think folks did embrace the shared agreements as we went through this process. Obviously, folks recall the presentation by Alan Lazo in the March meeting series around how the obligation that we have under the Fair Housing Act to affirmatively further fair housing and the history of racism and exclusion in housing policy nationally, but also here in Oregon. And so that's a cornerstone of the plan framework as well, is to make sure that the recommendations that are implemented are done so in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing under the Fair Housing Act. And then finally, just a little bit of an overview of the process for developing the recommendations. As we've talked about, the council, for those not aware, but watching the webinar, did adopt a planned framework back in March of 2023 as one of the objectives of the council under the executive order. It was to guide the work of the council as over the course of 2023. Folks can find that on the HPAC website, on the governor's office website. Establish a number of things to help lay out the framework for the council as a whole, as well as each of the work groups. If you recall, the council set 3 factors for prioritization of recommendations, both in the work groups and through the full council. The impact potential, which is a specific reference to the number of housing units, including affordable housing at 80% AMI and below, which is the state's definition of low-income housing and statute that would result from any particular recommendation. Second, it would be equity and racial justice to ensure that, again, the state is affirmatively furthering fair housing under the Fair Housing Act and centering communities of color and thinking about the potentially unintended impacts or consequences for either existing policy or new policy and program recommendations coming out of the council. And then finally, feasibility. And this was somewhat of a broader category, but it took into consideration the feasibility with regard to for time for implementation, immediate, short, medium, or long-term, the political support or complexity of the particular recommendation, again, high, medium, or low, and then cost as well. And particularly in the context of cost, it is looking at the cost to the state to implement a particular policy or recommendation. Finally, and I think this piece is not in the framework, and this was something that the co-chairs provided to the work groups and the work group chairs for folks that are on the webinar again. The co-chairs Hall and Tubby developed guidance and standards for analysis for each of the work groups. Part of the conversation there was the co-chairs understanding that each of the work groups would have a different work style and dynamic, but once the potential recommendations made their way to the full council, we wanted to make sure that there was some amount of continuity across the work groups, and so that the council would see that across all of the recommendations and would be able to have that discussion and facilitate the public comment process and reviewing. And so there's a number of steps in the standards of analysis and the guidance to the work groups. We've highlighted some key pieces here in the report as well. Then we roll into the policy and program recommendations from the council themselves. So I think it's important to say, for the record and for those that were not able to participate in the 12/27 meeting, both council members and members of the public, that the council has ratified 59 recommendations for the final report. The use of the word ratify is important. It should not signify that any particular council member supports every one of the 59 recommendations. Each recommendation went through the standard council process, and I think probably for the last time I'll share what that is. A first reading where the work group introduces the potential recommendation to the full council. a second reading, and the council has a chance to have initial discussion, ask questions, ask for follow-up information. The second reading is when public comment is provided by both written form and verbal comment at the meeting. And then the third reading is when the council will make changes, present updated recommendations, discuss, and eventually take an action to vote for or against a particular policy or program recommendation. Each of the 59 did go through that process, and I will say that none, well, I think there may be a few, but for the most part, there were many recommendations that did not have unanimous support. You know, the governor wanted folks to come to the table to share their perspective, didn't expect that every recommendation that made it through the process would be accepted by all members of the council. And so it was important to the co-chairs that at the December meeting, the vote that took place was to ratify all 59 recommendations and let the positions that people took during each the adoption of each preliminary recommendation stand as the record of where there was support and where there was not support. So that's been included here as well. I will flag for members of the council that were not able to attend. It was important to some folks that some additional comment was added into the report around whether or not they had council members had changed their position on particular recommendations, or if council members were not able to attend a particular HPAC meeting, because there have been a number of them over the last 9 months, that to the extent they wanted their perspective on a recommendation shared or updated, that I would work to reflect that in the document. So that is still an outstanding offer. And then so before we finalize it, just know that you can get in touch with me. You can mention it now, or you can get in touch with me after this meeting. It will not change a vote that happened at a past meeting. You know, it was a public meeting that was noticed to the public. There was a vote, but I will put the context in the report to the extent that your perspective has changed, or you would like your perspective represented and you weren't at a particular meeting. What folks will find in the policy and program recommendations section itself is essentially I took the summary of each of the policy recommendations. You know, if you were to take the full standards of analysis forms and try and put them in one document or print them out, it's a fairly long document or a fairly thick binder. And so we took just the summary policy statements around what was being recommended and highlighted them in the main report here in front of you. It's still a pretty lengthy document, but it seemed like the appropriate way to summarize it. And then again, for each recommendation, there's a link to the standards of analysis form itself, which includes the full form that folks filled out, any appendices or data or reports that were referenced by the work group and added to the recommendation form itself. So if folks are looking at this from the work groups and they think it's not there are key pieces of information missing that need to be pulled for this from the standards of analysis form that did not make it into the recommendation because we took the box 1 content, just let me know. You can again let me know in this meeting or let me know after the fact. It's not going to substantively change the ratified recommendations or substantively change the report. And so I'm happy to make those changes. Again, I'm working with the co-chairs on their letter. We're working to finalize this, and then we'll put it into a design form. So there is a little bit of time there, but try and get back to me in the next week or so. And then finally, I'll just note that I took some editor's privilege and changed the name of some of the recommendations. Some of them were really long. Some of them were a little bit kind of technical or confusing in terms of the language. So you will see that the potential title of each recommendation may be slightly different than what you discussed in the work groups or what you put in the standards of analysis form. And that's really just for clarity there. If I have grossly misrepresented what the recommendation is, again, I'm not going to go through them all right now, but ping me, let me know that I've grossly misrepresented it. Yeah, the name change is reflective through the whole document itself. So just flag that as well. once you get through all the recommendations, you'll find that some recommended next steps. So these next steps were really derived from primarily either the co-chairs themselves or in the conversation on the 27th of December. I think there's been some general good acknowledgement through the process by the co-chairs, by various council members, and then in the discussion at the ratification vote that there's been a lot of work that's happened over the last 9 months. There have been a lot of topics covered. There have been a lot of work group meetings, a lot of subject matter experts, and not everything that needs to get done to fully consider a recommendation or to fully structure the implementation of that recommendation has been done. And so this page is highlighting to the governor recommendations on next steps from the council as she assesses the recommendations and determines which she'd like to move forward. With regard to the Racial Justice Council review and feedback for folks that were not able to attend the meeting that was close to the holidays, I do want to reiterate Co-Chairs Hall and Tovey had me reach out to the co-chairs of the Governor's Racial Justice Council Committee on Housing and Homelessness to talk through what the HPAC process was, to talk through what would likely be the product in December, which is quite a lengthy series of recommendations, and ask what the co-chairs of the RJC Housing and Homelessness Committee, what their preference was on reviewing the recommendations. The committee co-chairs agreed that given that most of the bulk of the HPAC recommendations were not going to be done until late November or early December, that it wouldn't be feasible for them to try and review 59 in a month or 2 months. And so they agreed with the HPAC co-chairs that a review after the ratification was most appropriate so that they could see what the full document looked like, review them, and offer any comments to the governor that they thought was important. Second, Council Member Madsen had flagged that it was important that we incorporate a fair housing assessment. This is something that the co-chairs had talked about as well. And so there's a subsequent recommendation around a fair housing assessment of the 59 recommendations or any recommendations that the governor would like to explore moving forward. Third, there has been some general acknowledgement, I think, by various council members through the process that there's overlapping policy goals that the state has and some amount of reconciliation. The co-chairs, and I think for the most part, the council has leaned into an approach of the council's mandate is to identify what policies and programs would increase housing production. And it is the job of the governor and the legislature to then reconcile these recommendations with overlapping or potentially competing public policy objectives. And so this is just an acknowledgement of that's the approach that this council has taken, is acknowledging that some of these recommendations may overlap or impact other public policy objectives, but that the mandate of this council was to talk about what would increase housing production, and that the responsibility on that reconciliation rests elsewhere. And so it was important to some of our council members and to the co-chairs that we get that on, I guess, virtual paper. And then the last is just an acknowledgement of the fiscal, legal, and technical reconciliation that has to occur. And so this is, again, an acknowledgement that different recommendations have different amounts of detail. They have different depths of analysis and information, and that there's going to be, depending on the recommendation, there's going to be a different amount of body of work that needs to occur as recommendations are either explored or as they are moved to implementation. Moving to the appendix, you'll see that Appendix A has just all of the tracking around the preliminary adoption and ratification for each of the recommendations, when the readings occurred. So this is part of the appendix, as well as notes to the extent that council members want them included. Appendix B is, we had 4 of the work groups that chose to do some type of prioritization after the meeting on the 27th. And so that is reflected here in Appendix B. Availability of land chose to prioritize recommendations. Land development and permit applications chose to group select recommendations into greatest impact or most immediate. Codes and design took a similar approach around greatest impact, immediate impact, or quick and painless recommendations. Finance, Ivory and Daniel can speak to this, but they had a great infographic survey tool that they used to assess transformational change, marginal impact, or positive impact. And so that's incorporated here. And then finally, the last added piece is Appendix C, which the co-chairs asked me to have the estimated time frame, feasibility, and cost for each of the recommendations from the standards of analysis form reflected in Appendix C as a reference point. For the most part, every recommendation assessed each one of these categories. There were some missing pieces. I think that's fine. I just left them blank, but that's what you'll find here in Appendix C. So that's where the draft report stands today. Maybe I'll pause and take any questions or hear any comments from folks on the current draft and changes that anyone would like to see.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and anybody feel free to jump in. Seeing it all kind of in sequence makes me realize just the amount of work we did. You know, and then one of the topics that we talked about was a work product from the state economist, and we talked to him and worked through some logistics of that, but ultimately kind of landed in a place where they weren't 100% comfortable kind of doing a high, medium, low level of production type analysis based on sort of some of the variables between different recommendations and that type of thing. So unfortunately, we're not able to land that particular element of the report.
Deb?
Co-Chair Tubby,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for adding the additional, I think it was page 37, and listening to the conversation from December, the last week of December. I just think that adding that additional page probably eliminated some of the angst across the committee, and I just wanted to say that it was done really well. So thank you to the co-chairs and to Matthew.
Anybody else? Comments, questions, other timelines? Everyone's not done. I will say thank you, Matt, for clarifying on the titles. I was reading it. I'm like, did I miss that meeting? And I went back and had to read it again. I'm like, oh, I know what this is, but I don't remember that title. So I did that about 4 times. I'm like, Matt must have made this clearer. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, of course. And again, if I misrepresented in some of the recommendations were, the titles were longer than the summary of the recommendation. So I tried to just adjust them a bit. So if I mess something up, just let me know and I'll fix it.
I see it. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, great work, everybody. And it's been such a pleasure working with you all. One of the things that's kind of been bugging me, and I don't know how and if this can manifest in the report, but you know, we talked about it early, and that is the kind of the diverse nature of the different jurisdictions within the state of Oregon, and the fact that I'm concerned that some of the policy could disproportionately favor urban areas which have higher AMIs and lower natural rent levels. And so the gap is essentially the gap to provide housing, accessible housing, is larger in more rural jurisdictions with lower AMIs and lower rents. And so as you know, I've been a big advocate for the state beginning to participate in levels above the currently mandated 80% and below affordable category, and move up into workforce housing between 80 and 120. But also that's a very different thing in say Jackson County as compared to Multnomah County. And so I think as it moves forward, I think more resources necessary where AMIs are lower in more rural areas. And it would be good to somehow articulate that as these ideas move towards policy, even with the loan fund, which is I think a priority of the governors this year.
I think it's been a balance that we've been trying to strike throughout the entire time. Is on one hand, it's almost kind of expected that a lot of the housing production necessarily has to happen in more urban areas, and so there has to be some things done there. But to your point, I think the disparity between need and absolute need is probably greater, and the cost per unit against AMI is probably higher in rural areas. Especially if you have to build a road. You might not have to build a road in an urban area to build a house, but in rural areas you have to build a road to build a house. So I hope that was captured in the some of the unintended consequences or some of the conflicts that will be addressed. Is maybe if the loan program for infrastructure, maybe there's a way for rural areas to have forgiveness or have a reduced rates or something that's kind of reflective in either through the AMI or through population density or other things like that. So but I do think that I think that was one thing we kind of addressed really early on, was that by its very nature the larger urban areas are probably going to be expected to carry a larger proportion of this needed housing in coming into the future. I mean, that's what is an urban area? Is that Pendleton an urban area? In some ways, yes. In other ways, it's Portland and the high urban areas. So I don't know. I feel you. I mean, I'm in rural areas and I see the disparities and I see the challenges, which are not just, availability of land. We have land, but do we have infrastructure? Do we have roads? Do we have water? Do we have sewer capacity? Do we have governmental systems to be able to handle it? Those types of things are different type of challenges that urban areas may or may not have.
And I'd just like to welcome the governor. Governor, welcome to the final HPAC meeting.
Good afternoon, Madam Governor. Good to see you.
Thanks for letting me drop in and spend some time with you so I get my housing policy fixed for the day. So it's good to see you again.
Well, we're ready to give you a fix of some housing policy. So right now we're just having a general conversation about the document and some kind of the questions, making sure we're kind of addressing everybody's concerns, issues, or just identified things they want to make sure is identified or kind of outlined within the document. So if no one else had any questions on that, kind of the next item in our agenda is kind of have the co-chairs of our work groups walk through some of their high level, or like there are 3 things that they could, wave a magic wand. What could they possibly do? So if there's any other conversation around the original part about just the document, we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Anybody else? Okay. Matt, do you want to walk us through? I can't remember who was up first for the.
Sure thing, Co-Chair Tevye. The first work group up, as always, is the availability of land. So Councilmember Flagan.
I should know that by now. I'm sorry. Sorry, Deborah.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tevye. Madam Governor, my name is Deb Flagan, and I'm honored to represent the Land Availability Work Group. I would like to recognize the members of the Work Group Committee, Dr. Brenda Bateman, Alyssa Gertler, Joel Matson, and Karen Rockwell for their dedication of the 8 recommendations that our work group is presenting to you today. We understand that these recommendations will be considered over time, and we would like to suggest that the following timeframes may be considered by you. The first 2 recommendations have the opportunity to be included in your upcoming housing bill, SB 1537, that we're excited about. That is slated for the 2024 short session. The 2 recommendations would include the one-time urban growth expansion recommendation, as well as utilizing the programmatic details outlined in the infrastructure funding criteria recommendation. The next 2 recommendations were suggested as expansions to your current executive orders for housing and homelessness, which allows flexibility on timing to have these implemented. And those 2 items would be leveraging the state-owned and leased land recommendation and the public-owned land available for affordable housing recommendation. And then lastly, we strongly ask that you consider the conversation pertaining the 3 wetland recommendations, as well as the expansion of the brownfield recommendation into the 2025 session. Tackling the limited buildable land availability inside our urban growth boundary, especially in our coastal and our Willamette Valley communities, is critical to addressing our housing needs. And these 4 recommendations would pertain specifically to that. We want to thank you for the opportunity and allowing us to serve, and your commitment and your leadership to making housing a priority for all Oregonians. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Flagan. Next up is the Land Development and Permitting Work Group. And unfortunately, Eric had a conflict. He sends his apologies to the group and to you, Governor. And he asked that Natalie, Councilmember Janney, present on that work group's behalf.
Good afternoon, Governor Kotek. My name is Natalie Janney, and I get the privilege of deputizing for Chair Olson this afternoon. The Land Permitting Group was made up of 7 HPAC members, Councilors Bunn, Cody, myself, Councilors Matthew, Chair Olson, Rajbadia, and Wood. Between the 7 of us, we represent all types of housing, from market rate to modular to middle housing to affordable housing. And we also represent experiences dealing with both public and private challenges across the state. The Land Permitting Group drafted 13 recommendations that were discussed with subject matter experts, advanced to the full HPAC, were preliminarily adopted, and are part of the finalized report we have today. And the 13 recommendations focused on 2 main aspects of the development process, which are time and certainty. Under the current processes we have today, developments take between 2 to 5 years to get through land use to when people actually move into the housing. There are 3 parts to the development process. There's land use, engineering, and building permits, and the recommendations proposed touch on all 3 of these areas. Well-needed housing and our land use laws are supposed to provide both certainty and limits on time. There is still improvement that can be made. Recommendations addressing delays and certainty issues in land use include early feasibility acceptance for land use decisions, temporarily changing type 3 decisions to type 2 decisions, which hopefully limit meritless appeals, by right adjustments of up to 20% of specified land use standards, 5-foot wetland buffers, and cottage cluster code modifications, both of which impact site layouts, expedited land use appeals, and electronic filing for LUBA. In addition, there's a recommendation for statewide clarification and enforcement of the 120-day rule, which is often not enforced as intended and causes quite a bit of delay. The recommendations for not delaying plan review for private utility companies, ODOT priority review for housing developments, and ODOT immediate opportunity fund for housing help reduce outside agency delays. And the plan review recommendation helps to ensure that construction plans are getting thoroughly reviewed in a timely manner. Lastly, expanding building codes division and local capacity for plan review and inspections is necessary in order to almost double the number of housing units that are currently being built. Increasing the certainty of how projects can be designed and how the process will proceed through the development process, as well as making the entire process go faster, will not only result in more housing units quicker, but help lower the cost of development, helping with affordability. Thank you for this opportunity.
All right, and then we're going to turn it right back over to Councilmember Janney to talk through the codes and design work group.
The codes and design work group was small but mighty. It included 5 members of the HPAC, Councilors Cody, myself, Olson, Rajbaidia, and Wood. Between the 5 of us, we still represented all types of housing and experiences across the state. As we were dealing with design and building codes, I wanted to point out that one of the early commitments the work group made was not to put forward any recommendations that compromise the safety of the public. I wish there was one recommendation that could make it quicker and cheaper to develop housing. Turns out that doesn't exist. We did have a subject matter expert very early on in the work group process that basically said we should just suspend with plan review altogether and trust licensed professionals who stamp plans. And while that would make things faster, it didn't seem like the best solution. So the codes and design group drafted 17 recommendations that were discussed with subject matter experts, advanced to the full HPAC, and are part of the finalized document. Some of the recommendations probably could have been in the land permitting work group, as there's a lot of overlap, but recommendations regarding the process for appeals for housing projects and hearing time standards will help to reduce the number of appeals for housing projects that are not based on approval criteria and help reduce the instances that conditions are placed on projects that result in fewer, more expensive housing units. Establishing statutory timelines for annexations and comprehensive plan changes will ensure these projects, which can add to housing, are processed in a timely manner. Recommendations like the condo and middle housing recommendations represent changes that are largely supported by those in both the public and private sector. These changes help remedy some portions of the process that cause unintended delays. We looked at ways to increase different types of housing, including a recommendation for increasing visitability, as well as ways to connect those looking for accessible housing with those who have accessible housing. I've heard you speak about how you don't like either or policies, and it can be so easy to pit housing versus the environment in an either or situation. While yes, we can have housing that doesn't negatively impact the environment, when it comes to things like urban trees and wetlands, there comes a point where one is prioritized over the other. The tree code and CFEC recommendations are meant to tackle the question of what happens when the environment and housing are at odds with one another. While it would be amazing to never have to decide what is the higher priority, that is not the case for a lot of the available land remaining in Oregon's urban growth boundaries. These recommendations are not about saying the environment isn't important, but rather that land within the urban growth boundary is going to be prioritized for housing so that land outside the urban growth boundary can be preserved. Lastly, I wanted to point out that the great thing about a lot of these recommendations is that they don't require a lot of money. They don't need millions of dollars from the legislature. The recommendations deal with changing processes for how things are done, allowing for things to run concurrently rather than consecutively, and keeping local jurisdictions from reaching further than maybe they really should. While the 17 recommendations may seem to exist in the details rather than in the conceptual big picture, I can tell you that developments get held up in the details. We believe these recommendations will move the needle in helping to produce the housing that Oregon needs. And on behalf of the Codes and Design Work Group, thank you for this opportunity. All
right, thank you, Councilmember Janney. And given the nod that your recommendations don't cost any money, I think we will turn it over to Council Members Bunn and Matthews for the Finance Work Group's recommendations.
Well, thank you for that wonderful setup, Natalie, because ours do cost money. So we're now in the realm of having to make some revenue decisions. But good afternoon, Governor. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Bunn. I have the pleasure of co-chairing the Finance Work Group with Ivory. I do want to start by extending my personal gratitude to you and my thanks for pairing me up with Ivory. Our work group would have been adrift without her. I did a lot of running around, and Ivory came in and closed things up very nicely when we got to the end of our recommendations. So I'm very appreciative for having been with her. And working together as a group, we were able to come up with 15 really good recommendations that I think we're proud of. To walk a bit through our process, the great thing about finance is everybody comes to you and says, if you just throw money at my idea, I can make things better. And well, yeah, that's true from a very broad sense. But we read into our mandate in the executive order that we should probably triage and say what's most effective, knowing that at the end of the day, there are limited resources. So we spent the first half of the year listening to every idea under the sun when it came for how do we finance things better and what can we put money at. And we whittled that down into a couple of different buckets for our recommendations. So the first bucket for our recommendations are how do we make the money that we are currently spending, that's currently appropriated, how do we make that work better? So improvements to our processes for current government programs, tweaks along the way, maybe ways to restructure how the state gets money out the door. And as we were going through that process, we were very happy to see that on several items, agencies were already adopting things that we thought, hey, that's a good idea. For example, OHCS looking at the consolidated funding cycle and some other technical things. So there's things that didn't make this into the report because our state staff was already on top of it, and that's fantastic. There's really good alignment on the staff side with the direction that you're pushing for at the executive level. The second bucket was things that, well, these are transformational changes, but they're going to cost some money, and a lot of those center around helping out our partners, the state's partners, local jurisdictions, counties, cities, housing authorities. There's very good alignment on what we need to get done, but there's a critical lack of resources, especially at the local level. So some of our big hitting recommendations relate to how do we get resources deployed to get impediments out of the way. Something that comes along with that, of course, is the revenue conversation. We do have a recommendation about raising revenue. I will put a big asterisk next to that and say we are not revenue experts, we're not tax policy writers. But the purpose of that recommendation is to flag that if we want to have big transformational change, it probably makes sense to have a conversation about revenue, both to raise new revenue and also to look at how our revenue policies impact people's incentives. So there's a huge political process that comes after that. We're very aware of that. But really the point of including that was to say, hey, this is worth having a conversation about. Having said that, we went through a brief exercise to prioritize what we thought would be the most impactful items. And the three top items that our committee came back with at the very end were the infrastructure recommendation, looking at the state providing infrastructure to local jurisdictions, the creation of a dedicated housing finance authority, or dedicated agency like many other states do, and then the creation of a low interest loan fund. So I know those are all being discussed within your office, but I just wanted to put a plug in there that we think that's where the biggest gains can be made. Having said that, I talked with Ivory this morning and we decided that I would get to do the easy part and she could do the hard part, because that's what we've done all year. So I've done the easy part and now I'll hand it over to Ivory for the hard part to talk about the more complex things that we had to address.
Thank you, Daniel. I also have Daniel on the hook for some other projects to help me with throughout the year. So hard parts are coming up for him. Want to thank you, Governor Cote, for entrusting in all of us and using our skills and expertises and coming up, drafting a framework for the production of housing throughout the state of Oregon. We also want to acknowledge, the Finance Committee wants to acknowledge for the record that equity has been a part of our deliberations as concepts were considered. And we also would like to acknowledge that we know that a deeper level of analysis may be needed. Being that a deeper level of analysis is needed, we're super excited that page 37 is included in this recommendation because it talks about the future work of the Racial Justice Council Committee on Housing and Homelessness in reviewing and providing feedback, thus doing a much better job of adding a lens of equity and racial justice on these recommendations as they move throughout the next process. So just wanted to highlight that phase of the work that we did. Thought it was very important to acknowledge that. And thank you again for this opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you, Council Members Bunn and Matthews. We will now turn it over to Councilmember Mills to tackle the workforce shortages work group.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Governor, and thank you so much for this opportunity for all of us to weigh in and lend our expertise into your process. And I'm particularly honored to have served as the chair of the Workforce Shortages Working Group. And my colleagues on this group were Alyssa Gartler, Deb Flagan, and Riley Hill. So, and also thank you for allowing us to present our findings directly to you today. That's a very special honor. Our committee is comprised of members who may not directly work with the workforce development field, but we are deeply impacted by the challenges of housing-related workforce shortages and have dedicated many months to understanding workforce vulnerabilities and workforce development programs in Oregon and around the country. First, we needed to gain a better understanding of the landscape. So we interviewed over 30 subject matter experts from fields including the construction industry, education, workforce development, local and state governments, and related building industry professions. We engaged stakeholders, including representatives from multiple trade associations, trade unions, union contractors, independent contractors, workforce investment boards, and so many more. These experts guided us through learning about their experience with workforce development and their aspirations for a more effective system. Through these conversations emerged two main themes. First, the current construction and related industry workforce is experiencing a net loss of workers on a year-over-year basis, but you already knew that. With the deluge of retirement eligibility looming within the next decade, time is of the essence as we implement solutions. Second, Oregon's workforce ecosystem is hindered by conflicting agendas, funding gaps, and challenges related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Addressing these themes head-on, we recommend a 5-year investment to $77 million to train 6,000 new skilled workers. This investment includes development and implementation of a statewide, standardized, BOLI-approved curriculum for apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs, alongside support for standardized curriculum for building industry professionals. Additionally, funding would be allocated for career and technical education, including consumables for pre-apprenticeship programs. We advocate for the alignment of Oregon's workforce development systems. To achieve this, a statewide coordinating body comprised of multiple state agencies, public-private entities, should collaboratively work toward maximizing the collaboratively work toward maximizing the impact of workforce development initiatives and reducing gaps in the workforce pipeline in all of Oregon's communities. Now, entry into the construction trade apprenticeship program is a clear and obvious bottleneck. This limitation must be immediately and dramatically relieved to encourage new worker influx and retention into construction trades. Without this, we simply cannot meet the workforce needs for current construction demands, let alone meet the production goals established in your Executive Order 2304. The Workforce Shortages Working Group strongly recommends increasing the number of apprentices allowed per journey level worker. This will be critical in developing a homegrown workforce and retaining our potential workforce within the state of Oregon. While apprenticeship programs maintain quotas for admissions of underrepresented populations, our attention extends beyond admission. Retention and completion remain challenges for these groups. Industry participation as an employer, sponsor on the Oregon State Apprenticeship and Training Council, or on the local committees can be costly, which may present barriers for underrepresented businesses. To encourage completion success of underrepresented apprentices, we must increase leadership and administrative participation from underrepresented employers. To overcome financial barriers, this working group recommends cost abatements, subsidies, and reimbursements to support participation from minority-owned, women-owned, rural, and small or emerging construction businesses. In line with our commitment to fast-tracking potential workers, we propose the establishment of a housing production workforce corps. This boot camp initiative may be particularly effective when aligned with re-entry or other rehabilitation programs. As you know, Oregon's housing production workforce is at a critical juncture. The workforce shortages working group recommendations aim to create a collaborative, well-funded, and inclusive approach to workforce development in all regions of our state. By implementing these measures, we hope we can build a robust workforce pipeline, meeting our housing production goals and ensuring the prosperity of all of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mills. And then co-chairs Hall or Tuvey, did you have anything you wanted to add before I turn it over to Governor Kotek?
Well, just thank you to the work group chairs and all the members of the work group and all the work that went into these 59 recommendations. I think we really have something to be proud of, and a lot of good, well-sourced information and policy options for our policy leaders to utilize and going forward, and not just this session, but in the ongoing effort to get caught up on the amount of housing that we need. So again, thanks for all that work and ably summarizing it and condensing it down into our agenda here for today. And other than that, just a big thanks to the department staff and the governor's office for the foresight of how we framed this process to get here, and to Governor Kotek for your leadership on day one of your being in office, passing the executive orders that set the ball rolling to get us to this place, and have this report and this information that hopefully can push the policy needle forward on really getting Oregon back on track with our housing production. JD?
Yep. Thank you so much. I can't thank everybody enough for the work. I've said it probably a dozen times. It's just a monumental amount of work. But I do want to also extend the thank you, especially the gratitude to the governor for entrusting Damien and I to help lead this. It was a little thing to do, and then also, just a few meetings, one meeting a month, and it's like, we got to solve housing. But I do want to. I think it's been a great experience, but I do also want to commend this is just an example of good governance. And no time did feel like a political process. It felt like a group of Oregonians coming together to solve common problems, and I think it's kind of a testament to the leadership of you, but also the legislature, our partners with the legislature, as well as in the departments, on just coming together and working towards common goals. We might not all agree on all the solutions or all the problems even, or even pathway forwards, but at least this is giving us an opportunity to give us options, not only for urban Oregonians, but rural Oregonians, and be able to, make housing a reality for more people as we kind of move forward. So I just mostly want to extend that and kind of thank the governor for the leadership in this. And with that, I think we can turn it over to the governor for any questions for us, and we will do our best to answer and bring up as much as we can.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tuvey. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you, Co-Chairs Hall and Tuvey, for your leadership. I wish we could be in person. It's safer to be virtual today, but I wish I could look each of you in the eye and shake your hand and say thank you. It's very kind of you to be thanking me, but I want to thank you. Less than a year ago, you all came together, not quite sure, as we always are in these things, what you were committing to. But there has been so much work done in less than a year to do exactly what was asked of you, which was to be bold, come up with everything you can think of that could make a difference to get us to an increased production goal. You didn't disappoint, 59 recommendations. I held off reading the draft recommendations because I really wanted to give you the opportunity to frame them and be the first one to tell me what's in them. There was a conversation about taxes that came up in the paper, but in terms of the overall recommendations, just hearing the enthusiasm in the voice of the chairs who were giving the presentations and the things that you were thinking about, how you want to prioritize them. It means a lot to hear that. I think you've done tremendous work. I want to, again, thank co-chairs Hall and Tovey for their leadership, the legislators who have been involved, and we've had changes, but people have been so committed from our legislative colleagues. We've had our agency directors and staff working. We've had our work group chairs, all of you. We've had our subject matter experts, right? People coming in and giving us the courtesy of a generosity of their time and expertise to give us all kinds of ideas. It's a really impressive body of work. And I think, as we all know, we have to have it in one place, and then we need to figure out what comes next, right? The work that we're doing for the 2024 session and the bill that I introduced, Senate Bill 1537, is reflective of some of the work that you've already done, right? We started somewhere and we have, a set of proposals. There's 11 programs, 4 land use changes, a comprehensive set of tools in line with what you've been working on, with a big financial ask to say, and what I've been saying is we need this bill this year to jumpstart the production we need to see. And that is just the first step. Probably the hardest thing in all of these things sometimes is that first step. Sitting down, wrestling with the details, coming up with a game plan. And I know from the depth of the work that you've done, that these recommendations are an excellent foundation that will bear fruit. Our goal is to build homes. Our goal is to face this crisis head on and to have such wonderful folks like yourselves and your extended networks and all the subject matter folks who come in to say, we can do this, right? Here are all the things. And now it's up to us and up to my team to sit down with these things, all these recommendations, and say, okay, where do we go next, right? And as has been mentioned, some of them are not resource dependent. There's always some resources, but they're not overly resource dependent. Others are, right? We are trying to build a public good. We are trying to make sure we have more homes, and that will take financing. And the question is what the commitment can be to get there, right? So to know that we've talked about land supply and permits and code and design and financing and workforce. I always tell people it's not one thing that's going to make this happen. You have to have all these things working in a coordinated fashion with commitment at the local level. I will say, from traveling around the state last year with the One Oregon Listening Tour, we talked about housing in every community. And I feel like the nuances of the diversity of our state in terms of urban, suburban, rural, frontier, the different challenges. I think you've really done a good job capturing that. And housing is a challenge everywhere. We're here for a reason. We can build our way out of this. It will take concerted effort, and to know that we have a set of recommendations that will guide us it's a really great place to be. And now, like everything else, there's more work to do. Where do we go next? How do we get there? I know that we'll be focused on the bill for the session that Senate Bill 15, I haven't memorized the number yet, 1537, to focus, and I'm hoping our legislative partners will see the value of the balance that we've brought in that proposal. And then we're going to turn around right after session and be like, okay, what's next, right? Where do we jump in next? What can we do administratively? What do we tee up for 2025? We need to have probably some deeper conversations on some items. And while your job is officially over, don't be surprised if I'm like, hey, I need to get the gang back together and have a conversation or two. So you might, have a random meeting here or there where I'd love to get some feedback on things. So be prepared for that. I just really appreciate your commitment to your state and to putting people in homes so people can have security and safety and health. And So I'm optimistic. I know there's always work to do, but I don't have necessarily any questions, but I just wanted to make sure you could hear from me directly how much I appreciate you. And next time I see you in person, I will give you all a big handshake or hug, whatever you prefer, to thank you for the work you've done. So I think one of the things that I will want to just in conclusion to kind of think about is, how do we phase these? How do, a lot of these things have to walk together, but how do you get them going? I'm excited about the consolidation work of our existing state funding streams that the agency is doing over at OHCS in terms of trying to consolidate our financing programs. I think that's going to be helpful coming up in the next year around the deeply affordable side. So a lot of work to do. So I'm going to pass it back to the co-chairs. I don't know if anyone else have any comments. I don't know if our legislators want to make comments, but I just want to say thank you again, and let's get going. More to do. So.
All right. Really appreciate the message, Governor Kotek, and for taking the time to come out and meet with us today and give that message. Although we couldn't be in person, I think before we open up to everybody and have a chance to sort of wrap things up, to the concept of getting the gang back together, I think this has gone well, and we're probably all available for that sort of a thing as policy discussions move forward, and the utility of the HVAC can be tapped into on an ongoing basis.
It might have to be an HVAC bat signal. So when you see the bat signal, we'll need a meeting. So really appreciate it.
It looked like a house.
Yeah, a little house in the sky.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah, we got it. And then I really want to just one last time thank the group, right? Like it's been mentioned a couple of times, no one's ever sure going into these how it's going to go. We've got a very in some ways similar, but in many ways very diverse group of people. Everyone here is an expert in the portion of the housing world that folks operate in on a day-to-day basis. But just like there's 59 recommendations, there's at least that many different roles and different industries and sub-industries and regions and areas of the state, and different levels of affordability and different demographics utilizing the housing, and different business models for financing and developing housing, and for folks who are in all different parts of that to come together, primarily virtually, and 25 of you all, and get as much work done as we did. I think that's something commendable and that we should all be proud of. So that's it for me. Kick it, JD, but would want to give anyone who else would like to talk the opportunity.
And I forgot because he's just such a fixture in my life, is I want to thank Matt and his work on behalf of our housing team at the governor's office. We have a great team, right? And every time I called Matt, he took my call and be like, what are we doing? What's going on? And so he's just been an incredible leader and guider on what you're trying to do, and interpreting and putting it into, a form where we can, go forward on. So thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I would like to open the floor to other HVAC members, especially the legislative partners, if they'd had any comments, questions, or otherwise, and to our department directors as well.
I'm going to quickly jump here. First of all, Governor, good to see you, and thank you so much for your leadership and the opportunity to work with you on this Housing Production Council. I have learned a lot. I think this process was really incredible, and I'm really grateful to be part of this conversation. The co-chair was incredible, provide us leadership, amazing leadership, but also I think participants, members who are here, really brought us recommendations that are really well thought and really help us to make some decisions and recommendations to adopt. But I think more importantly also, this was a public dialogue. Because there was a lot of community members who take time off from their day-to-day activity and come to us and provide us testimony. That's been incredible to watch that. So it was really Oregonians, as co-chair said earlier, it's Oregonians coming together from different way of life and different expertise, trying to put Oregon back together. And that's really what I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to the partnership with you and your office, as well as the other legislators. And I think we're going to make this work happen. But it's also remind all of us that this is actually not a sprint, it's a marathon. It will take a time to develop these strategies and adapt some of this short session coming 2024, but also long session and beyond that. So I'm just here to say that, this is Oregon. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to give us the platform.
I see Representative Dexter. Sorry, it looked like you were trying to go for your microphone. Senator Anderson?
I will. Thank you. And I'll let me ditto what Senator Jama has said. Certainly thanking everybody. And, I got to tell you, apologize that I'd hoped I would have gotten inside some of the work groups and listened, had the ability to and availability to listen to some of those experts that you brought in. Even though I appreciate your own expertise, I'm always pleased when we reach out a little further. I do have to admit at the beginning, the unknown, the process was certainly something that threw me off. We could build houses as long as much process as we went through this, but over time, I appreciated the steps, Matt, that you kept us on, and JD and everybody really staying attuned to what the mission was. So I've appreciated that. I am going to use the governor's bill and the recommendations through the short session, and certainly looking into the 25 long session. If I'm so lucky to be reelected, will be plenty of time to do more housing. But Governor, I appreciate your emphasis most of in this statement today of it's time to get some actual production going. That's exactly what needs to be done. And I think we've laid enough groundwork. Let's just get it done.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am struggling with my computer, so if I'm glitching, please let me know. Really nothing further to add. Grateful for the service that you all as chairs and members have provided, and the leadership that the governor and her team have provided. It's really been an excellent process, and I appreciate how valuable your subject matter expertise and wisdom is. And it's just a fantastic treasure for us to be able to build upon. So thank you all. And
And any other committee members? Okay. Hearing none and not seeing any hands, correct me if I'm overlooking anything, but the last thing on our agenda, we have our usual placeholder for next steps. Is that right, Matthew?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
so for the last time, I guess, share my thanks again for the group. Next steps, you all have the latest draft. Walk through it. If you have any changes, just let me know either this week or next week, and then I'll be working with the co-chairs to finalize the letter, and then we will take it and take it from the content version that you have, and well, I won't, but somebody will make it look nicer than I can make it look. So just thank you for all of that, and yeah, appreciate everyone's time over the last 9 months. Pass it back to the co-chairs and the governor to close it out.
Well, I think I would be remiss, thank you, Matt, and thank you, co-chairs, to not say that the goal of governance and participation, civic participation, is to put the best ideas out there and show progress. You know, we have a bill for the legislative session. I hope you'll all be able to talk to folks about why it's important. No piece of legislation is perfect. It's always a set of balancing various values and interests. And I think the bill that we have before us in the session is really saying, if we put all these things together, with a hope to say, build with some intent, right? To meet our goals. This will be a multi-year process, but this bill, I believe, is absolutely essential this year for us to get done. And I do believe there is no greater value of one-time dollars being spent than on investing in jumpstarting our production. It is an economic issue that's impacting every corner of our state. And when we invest in infrastructure, and in this case, homes in our communities, we will see decades of benefit. Now's the time to get in and move forward. And my hope is end of session, we have those tools in place, and then we keep working on the other recommendations that have come forward. So just really appreciate everyone. Stay safe, stay warm, or stay dry at this point, because I think things are going to start melting. So just, thank you again for the opportunity, and back to whichever co-chair is closing us out.
All right. Thank you, Governor. And with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you for all the hard work that's gotten to us to this spot. Keep an eye on your inbox for the final report here in the coming days. And you'll be hearing more about our work as policy progresses forward through the state. And again, thank you for all your participation in the great process. And on a personal note, it's been a pleasure getting to know and meet and work with the vast majority of the folks on this council. This was our first time to interact, and I've come away, really impressed with everyone's professionalism, ability and willingness to get down to work and really have a meeting of the minds and to, open-minded and civil discussion about really what are the policy trade-offs that would benefit us as a state and reaching our housing production targets. So much appreciated. You all know where to find me. If there's any way that I can, help you in your day-to-day life, feel free to reach out. And with that, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Damian.